The next section of our book is called Our Eagle Memories Live On. It was hard to pick just 4 to read tonight. In the January 2000 newsletter, Audrey Houck wrote a charming poem detailing some of the changes she witnessed in Eagle over the years. EHS member and new Town of Eagle board member, Sandra Shorr, will share these memories with you.
Hello. I came to Eagle when I was 18. Many of the changes I have seen. The bandstand is gone and so is the fence, where we watch the movies full of suspense. To Crossway and Creston's for penny candy. At showtime both were very handy. In winter the walk to the Fairbrothers Hills or St. Teresa's, there were plenty of spills. The mills are gone, so is the hotel. In its place, a 4-unit motel. We now have Old Smiley, our claim to fame. I guess nothing ever stays the same. 2 B&Bs, subdivisions galore. I suppose there's room for 1 or 2 more. I wouldn't change all the progress I've seen, although at times I wasn't too keen. Industrial parks, new homes aplenty. More children to play in our parks, they're never empty. I love this old village, I'd never move away. 50 years, such a short time to stay.
Dr. Jack Crawley was a colorful and beloved veterinarian to farmers and pet owners in Eagle and Palmyra. We are delighted to have Kris Crawley to read his addition to the October 2006 newsletter. There's a couple stories on this. The first one is temper. Milking cows and a bad temper definitely do not mix. I knew from past experience that this customer had a bad temper because I had treated one of his cows with pitchfork marks from her heels to her toes. That temper would prove to be the ruination of him. Sometime later, that very cow had her revenge. He was walking out of milking her with a full pail of milk when she decided that she was going to kick him and break both legs. He suffered a great deal from that injury, being in a cast for many months. He eventually returned to farming, but things never went well for him after that, and he ended up a bitter man. The editor's note, all of God's creatures deserve some kindness, except maybe the mosquitoes. Snow days for the vet. Some days it just doesn't pay to get out of bed. And I had such a day in February of 1974 when we were having a blizzard with winds about 30 miles an hour and snow blowing in from the north. It was the kind of day that Wisconsin is famous for. And I hoped that phone would not ring that day, but unfortunately it started at 7:30 a.m. The farmer had a youth and a young heifer which he had been trying to get settled and had been unsuccessful. This morning she was in heat, meaning she would ovulate in the next few hours. She had to be inseminated within the next 4 to 6 hours, or we would have to wait 21 days until she was fertile again. I tried to persuade him to wait because of the weather, but he pleaded, would I please come and breed her that morning? He lived about 25 miles from Palmyra, and it was nearly 10:30 before I returned home. 3 weeks later, the heifer I had bred came back into season, and I had to rebreed her. And so that had been a wasted call. I had no sooner got out of my insulated coveralls and boots when the phone started ringing again. This time, it was a very excited woman from Paradise Springs who had a horse down in the snow. She told me that her regular veterinarian couldn't get there because of the weather, and she needed help very badly. I've often remarked I don't particularly like horses. Nevertheless, I answered her call. The buildings were about a half a mile up from the road. I was driving a Volkswagen truck, which would go through snow up over the bumpers. I just had started treating the prostate animal when Dr. Howard Cook arrived on the scene. He had to leave his car at the gate because of all the snow. So any drugs we needed to use all came from me. He instructed me to give the animal cortisone, a shot of vitamin B complex, a bottle of protein 4, and another bottle of glucose intravenously. Then he asked the woman owner if she had a bottle of wine, which she did because they ran a tavern. While she was gone to get it, I told Howard we should drink the wine and rub the empty bottle on the horse, and at least we'd feel better. But he insisted that we drench the animal with the wine. We had gotten the horse onto a rug and pulled it back up into the stable. But that night, it got up, fell out the door, and froze to death. Dr. Crook had gotten paid on the spot. I had to wait over 3 months to collect. I told him the next time I had to kill a horse, I could do it without his help.
Another colorful chapter in Eagle's history was the time when hobos roamed the railroad tracks, and there was a jail that offered them a place to rest. Here to read an article from the 2010 newsletter is EHS member Phil Hall.
Jail and Hobos by Gene Seisler and Bill Teeley, Eagle Historical Society. Newsletter, July 2010. Information presented here was taken from the April through October minutes of 1915. Back in 1915, the Eagle Village Board boasted of some of the same kind of people that are on the board today, albeit their professions were somewhat different. There are probably no blacksmiths or harness makers on today's board, but their intentions were no doubt the same, to oversee the village and make the most of the budget they had. They handled the business of the village and dispatched things quickly. Their minutes show that little time was wasted on frivolities. They got right to the point. Early in 1915, the matter of a jail came up. It was decided to allot $150 for the erection of a jail. A few meetings later, it was decided to drop that plan and allow an amount of not to exceed $95. In any case, the jail was eventually built. The minutes do not designate the actual location of the jail, but fortunately we have members with a very good memory. Apparently, merging all the memories, we come up with a jail in the area near Highway 67 on the west side of Partridge, across from the hen house. The jail was made of concrete, roof and all. It was approximately 8 to 10 feet wide and 14 to 16 feet deep. There were 2 cells and 2 cots in each cell. Vagrants and hobos and drunks would use it when they needed a place to sleep. Our younger readers may not remember a time when people were called hobos. A hobo is a migratory worker or homeless vagabond, often penniless. The term originated in the western, probably northwestern United States during the last decade of the 19th century. Unlike tramps who worked only when they were forced to, and bums that didn't work at all, hobos were workers who wandered. It's unclear exactly when the hobos first appeared on the American railroad scene. With the end of the American Civil War in the mid-19th century, many soldiers looking to return home took to hopping freight trains. Others looking for work on the American frontier followed railroads westward aboard freight trains in the late 19th century. The population of hobos increased greatly during the Great Depression era of the 1930s. With no work and no prospects at home, many decided to travel for free via freight trains and try their luck elsewhere. Life as a hobo was a dangerous one. In addition to problems of being itinerant, poor, far from home and support, and the hostile attitude of many train crews, railroads employed their own security staff, often nicknamed bulls, who had a reputation of being rough with trespassers. Also, riding on a freight train is a dangerous enterprise. The British poet W.H. Davies, author of the autobiography of a supertramp, lost a leg while falling under the wheels whilst trying to jump a train. One could easily get trapped between cars or freeze to death in bad weather. When freezer cars were loaded at the ice factory, and any hobo inside was likely to freeze. According to one source, as many as 20,000 people live the hobo lifestyle in North America today. Modern freight trains are much faster and harder to ride than in the 1930s, but can still be boarded in railway yards. Getting back to the jail, it was probably open. Demolition of the jail probably took place when the area was being prepared for the village well pump house reservoir about 1951 or 52. The area behind the jail to Archie Gale's garage, now the Kittle, and from the sidewalk in front of the Legion Hall to the railroad was a very low area. There were two old business buildings in front of where the current Legion Hall is located. One was a blacksmith shop and the other electric shop. Both of these buildings were on 7 or 8 foot stilts, which raised them slightly above the sidewalk level. They had ramps to enter these businesses due to the fact that this was a low area that flooded every spring when the snow melted. There were no storm sewers back then, and all the water from the higher ground across Highway 59 and from St. Teresa's Church came down and filled the low section. Once the area dried out, it became a hobo jungle with all kinds of small saplings, trees, and other brush. As mentioned before, there were many hobos around during the Great Depression of the 1930s. You would see them getting on and off boxcars when the train stopped in town. Supposedly a secret marking system was used to lead them to certain homes near railroads where the lady of the house would feed them. One particular house was owned by Mrs. Toohey. She always made the hobo work for his meal by splitting wood or other chores. There were other marked homes in the area where a hobo could get a good meal for some work that needed doing. In addition to the erection of jail, the board attended to many other things, such as appointing Von Ruden as marshal with a handsome figure of $50 a year in compensation. They also approved erecting of a building and tank for Standard Oil. It probably didn't hurt that the president of the board, Mr. Fiscal, was associated with Standard Oil. It seems that property assessments were the same bone of contention in 1915 as they are today. Citizens always think their assessments were too high and would argue the point before the board. There's no indication who won the argument, but it was probably not the citizen. Would be that we could have those assessments from 1915 today. Bills were paid none higher than $100 and license approved. One meeting there were 3 saloon licenses approved and 1 druggist got his permit. Apparently it was more favorable to take your medicine at the saloons. Street and weed commissioners were appointed along with all the other mundane workings of the village board. So, actually I do remember the jail. I wasn't in it.
The house across the street from the museum was once a hospital. Now it is the home of Elmer Killian, who's here tonight. Where are you sitting, Elmer? There he is, right in the middle. Elmer's house. He wrote his memories of life in a former hospital, and board member Dick Miller will share them with us tonight.
Life in a Former Hospital by Elmer Killian. This is from the Eagle Historical Newsletter in July of 2006. We bought the former Dr. Fitzgerald home and hospital in 1967. We had looked at many homes to buy, but it was in the high interest era. Financing was hard to obtain, an offer was made and accepted, and we ended up with a home for 4 children and their parents. I guess we did not know the history of the house until we moved in. Slowly over the next few years, we talked to nurses, caretakers, and other workers and came up with different aspects of the history of the home. The former hospital did have an operating room. Carol made it into a sewing room, so the cutting and stitching went on. With 3 girls, a lot of dresses and doll clothes were made. Curtains and light were finished for the home. We checked the whole house over after we knew that it had been a hospital. Only a couple of medicine bottles were found. Later, when spading was done for the garden and flower beds, vaccine bottles from the earlier time were found. There were no landfills in the early 1900s, so trash was burned and then buried. The whole side and back yards were the depository for furnace ashes and the like. This is about the 1 foot thick and 2 feet down. Good soil had to be placed over the ashes to fill it all in. We had heard the house might have some ghosts. This did not bother us, but to be on the safe side, we blessed each bedroom, 5, and let the ghosts, if any, know that we meant them no harm. Just leave us be and we will all live together. We have for 35 years. The children liked the house. Each had their own bedroom and the yard was large enough to play in. I understand at one time there was a dirt tennis court to the west of the house. I determined we are the 4th property owners of the property. It was used as an antique shop for a few years. Trying to refinish the woodwork in the house was a real job. Paint was such that it had to withstand bleach, soap, and water, and all. Now it is almost impossible to remove the layers of paint. Natural gas in the house at one time. Some outlets were still protruding from the walls. All have been removed. The house has radiator hot water heat. The children thought this was great for winter. Radiators can be used for drying wet snow clothes, and also one could sit on the radiators to warm themselves after playing in the snow. Eventually grandchildren came along. There is always room for someone to stay overnight or 2. The site of the house is nice for a large party or family gathering, but not the best to have for cleaning. With the children grown and gone, the grandchildren still make it a kid's house. Many toys and games are around to keep them entertained. For you folks of good memory, I suppose you are still wondering if there might be a ghost or 2. Okay, I did not forget. We have occasional heard sounds in the house of someone playing with toys in the upper bedrooms. This, I assume, is the lost soul of a child who might have gone to eternity while in the doctor's care for some malady. This is our supposition. We are still living, partying, and enjoying company of family and friends. I've talked to people who were born here, been sewn up here, and had surgery here. All felt it was a house of caring and curing. Just recently, I met a couple who worked to have the present-day medical building built. Dr. Schmidt had come into practice with Dr. Fitzgerald, and better space was needed. Times change a lot, and we will go for modernization. But it is still good to look back at the past. Mr. Kelly is here tonight, and I want to tell you a little story. He approached me at the ice cream social last summer and asked me if I wanted to purchase a lottery for who was going to be the first one to be serviced at the new Gibson Funeral Home.